Darkness hangs over the ancient city of Jerusalem. The air is still, yet it carries the weight of centuries of longing and conflict. And in that silence, one question echoes across time. How did a single city ignite one of the most explosive series of wars in human history? But that's not even the beginning. Because long before the crusading armies marched, long before kings and peasants swore divine vows, a spark had already been lit, one that no one expected would reshape continents. It would topple empires, crown unlikely heroes, and plunge entire kingdoms into chaos. Imagine thousands of men leaving everything behind, their homes, their families, their very sense of safety. They marched toward a distant land they had never seen, driven by faith, fear, and sometimes the promise of glory. Their footsteps thundered across Europe like an approaching storm. But the storm they were heading toward was even worse. And at the center of it all stands a mystery. Why did tens of thousands risk everything for a cause most barely understood? What force pulled nobles, peasants, thieves, and saints into the same long road toward the Holy Land? The truth is darker and far more complicated than the legends suggest. As the Crusaders approached Jerusalem, many believed they were part of a divine mission. Yet hidden beneath those shining ideals were rival ambitions, secret agendas, and political games that would shock even their own followers. And the deeper we go, the more we realize nothing about the Crusades was simple, so prepare yourself. This journey dives into the shadows of medieval faith, fear, and desperate hope. A journey filled with betrayals, miracles, triumphs, and horrors that shaped our world in ways most people never imagined. And the most unsettling part, what set the Crusades in motion, was not a single event, but a chain reaction nobody saw coming. The story begins now. To understand how the Crusades erupted, we need to step far back into a world divided by faith, ambition, and fear. Europe in the late 11th century was a land still recovering from centuries of turmoil. Kingdoms rose and fell with alarming speed, and many communities lived under constant threat from famine, disease, or invading armies. Yet beneath that uncertainty, a deeper tension simmered, the kind that would soon explode. The Christian kingdoms of Western Europe were fractured and restless. Lords fought lords. Kings struggled to control their own nobles. And the common people felt trapped in a relentless cycle of war and poverty. Many believed the world was slipping toward its final days. The church, more powerful than any king, became the one voice people trusted, and the one force capable of directing that fear toward a single purpose. Meanwhile, far to the east, the Byzantine Empire stood as a shimmering yet fragile remnant of Rome. Its capital, Constantinople, gleamed with wealth, mosaics, and towering walls. But behind those walls was a terrified emperor, Alexios I Komnenos, watching his empire shrink as new powers rose around him. Turkish forces known as the Seljuks had stormed across Anatolia, taking city after city. And with every loss, the Byzantines felt the ground trembling beneath their feet. But here's the part no one expected. Alexios, desperate and cornered, sent a plea for help to the west, a request for a few elite soldiers, perhaps some knights willing to lend their swords. He hoped for a small military aid. What he received instead was an earthquake that would reshape the medieval world. Across the Mediterranean, the Islamic world was also in flux. The Seljuk Turks were expanding rapidly, sometimes clashing with their fellow Muslims as much as with outsiders. Jerusalem, sacred to Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike, changed hands more than once in a single generation. Pilgrims who once traveled freely now faced danger, unpredictable conditions, and rumors of persecution, rumors that spread quickly through Europe, often twisted or exaggerated, but always powerful. This tension, swirling across continents, created a perfect storm. A fearful Europe, a fragmented Middle East, a desperate Byzantine emperor, and a church hungry for authority, all of them converged toward the same path. And at the center stood one man, Pope Urban II. Urban was ambitious, charismatic, and determined to strengthen the church's influence. When he heard Alexios' plea, he saw an opportunity, a chance to unify Europe under a holy banner, a chance to direct the violence of restless knights toward an enemy far from home, a chance to claim spiritual leadership over all of Christendom. He sensed the moment was ripe, and he would strike with precision. In November 1095, at the Council of Clermont, Urban delivered a speech that would alter the course of history. Accounts vary. Some say he described Jerusalem soaked in innocent blood. Others say he promised salvation to anyone willing to fight. But all agree on one point: his words ignited something primal in the crowd. People cried out. Knights lifted their swords, and thousands swore to march east. But no one, not Urban, not Alexius, not even the men who took the cross, realized what was truly coming. Because what started as a call for aid would soon become a tidal wave of pilgrims, warriors, and opportunists. And once that wave began moving, nothing could stop it. The stage was set. Europe was stirring. The Holy Land was waiting. And the First Crusade was about to begin. The First Crusade did not begin with the fanfare of kings or the discipline of armies. Instead, it began with chaos. Tens of thousands of ordinary people, farmers, wanderers, beggars, even children, took up the cross before the knights were ready. They believed God would guide their steps. But faith alone could not feed them, protect them, or prepare them for the brutal road ahead. This early wave became known as the People's Crusade, and its journey was filled with hunger, confusion, and deadly conflict. Villages along their path braced in fear as crowds swarmed through, begging for food or taking it by force. Some groups fell prey to charismatic but reckless leaders who promised miracles. Others were attacked by enemies long before they saw a single Turkish soldier. By the time they reached the outskirts of the Byzantine Empire, their numbers had already begun to crumble. And worse, the real danger still lay ahead. When they finally crossed into Anatolia, many expected divine protection, but no miracle came. The Seljuk Turks struck fast, using speed and precision the Crusaders had never seen. Arrows rained down like a sudden storm. Confusion spread through the camp. Panic followed. And the People's Crusade, the movement that had begun with hope and fire, collapsed in the dust. Only a few survivors returned to tell the tale. But this devastating defeat was only the beginning, because behind them marched the real armies, the disciplined, armored knights of Europe. These were the lords and warriors who had fought their entire lives, men who understood battle in a way the peasants never could. Led by figures like Raymond of Toulouse, Godfrey of Bouillon, and Bohemond of Taranto, they carried with them both determination and an unshakable sense of destiny. Their arrival in Constantinople created immediate tension. Emperor Alexius had asked for help, yes, but he had not expected this many. Thousands of heavily armed soldiers, each with their own ambitions, camped outside the greatest city in the medieval world. Alexius feared them almost as much as the enemies he faced. Yet he needed them. And so uneasy alliances were formed, sealed with oaths that many Crusader leaders never intended to keep. Once the Crusaders crossed the Bosporus, their true challenge began. Anatolia stretched before them like a vast, burning plain. Water was scarce. Supplies ran thin. Many knights walked beside dying horses, weakened by heat and thirst. And watching from the hills were Seljuk scouts, ready to strike at the first sign of weakness. At Dorylaeum in 1097, the Crusaders faced their first major test. The Seljuk archers attacked with terrifying speed, encircling part of the army before the rest could form ranks. Screams echoed across the dry plains as arrows pierced armor and shields. The Crusaders fought desperately, forming tight defensive lines. They prayed for reinforcements. And then, just when defeat seemed certain, the second half of the army arrived, charging in with unexpected fury. The Seljuks, caught off guard, were forced to retreat. It was a hard-won victory. But it came with a warning. The road ahead would be far more dangerous. As the Crusaders pushed deeper into the Middle East, every mile tested them. Cities fortified with high walls loomed on the horizon. Local leaders negotiated, stalled, or ambushed them when they found an opening. Disease swept through the camps, stealing lives without a single sword being drawn. Yet the Crusaders pressed on, driven by faith, pride, and the promise of Jerusalem. The siege of Antioch was the moment everything changed. The city stood like a massive stone titan, surrounded by towers and triple walls. Taking it seemed impossible, but retreat was unthinkable. So the Crusaders dug trenches, built siege towers, and fought for every inch of ground. Winter winds lashed their tents. Food vanished. Men collapsed from starvation. At one point, some knights considered abandoning the siege entirely, but then came a whisper of opportunity. Inside the city lived a discontented god named Firuz. Whether he sought gold, safety, or revenge, no one knows. But under cover of night, he sent a message to the Crusaders. He would open a gate. The plan was dangerous, almost absurd. Yet the Crusaders had no choice. So they climbed the dark walls, clinging to ropes, praying no alarm would sound. One slip, one shout, one torch in the wrong place, and everything would collapse. But the gate opened, and Antioch fell. Yet victory brought no relief, because the very next day, a massive Muslim relief army surrounded the city, turning the Crusaders from conquerors into the besieged. Exhausted, starving, and trapped, they fought desperation on all sides. And then came a discovery that electrified the entire camp. The Holy Lance, the spear said to have pierced Christ's side. Was it real? A miracle? A fabrication? No one knew. But belief is powerful, and hope can transform an army. With renewed courage, the Crusaders charged into battle. Against all odds, they broke the siege. Antioch was theirs, and the path to Jerusalem lay open. But no one could imagine what awaited them there. Not the soldiers, not their leaders, not even the Pope who launched the crusade. The greatest trial was still ahead. Jerusalem appeared on the horizon like a distant dream, golden, silent, almost unreal beneath the blazing summer sun. For 3 long years, the Crusaders had marched, starved, bled, and endured unthinkable suffering. Now the holy city stood before them. Yet as they approached, a chilling realization spread through the ranks. Despite everything they had survived, this would be the hardest battle of all. The walls of Jerusalem towered above the surrounding hills, fortified by defenders who understood the Crusaders' desperation. Water was scarce. The summer heat cut like a blade. Many soldiers were too weak to stand for long, let alone scale massive walls, and then came the worst part. The Crusaders had almost no wood to build siege towers. Without them, taking the city was nearly impossible. But then something strange happened. A mysterious vision spread through the camp. Some claimed it appeared to a humble priest. Others whispered it came during a shared dream. The message was simple yet electrifying. March barefoot around the walls of Jerusalem, just as the Israelites circled Jericho. Many scoffed at the idea. Others embraced it with fervor. And soon, in an eerie procession, thousands walked the dusty perimeter, chanting, praying, hoping for a miracle. No one knew what would come of it. But the very next day, Crusader scouts discovered something astonishing. A hidden supply of timber, enough to build the siege engines they needed. Had locals abandoned it? Had it been overlooked before? Or was it something more mysterious? Even today, historians disagree. But in that moment, the Crusaders believed it was a sign. With renewed urgency, they built towering wooden machines. Massive wheels groaned, metal clattered. The defenders watched nervously from the ramparts, aware that the Crusaders had somehow found the strength and the materials they shouldn't have had. Tension thickened like the heavy desert air. Something monumental was approaching. Then came July 15th, 1099. At dawn, horns blared. Siege towers rolled forward. Arrows cut through the sky. The sounds of war shouting, crashing, burning echoed through the valley as if the earth itself were crying out. One tower caught fire, collapsing in a storm of embers. Another reached the wall only to be pushed back by desperate defenders. For a moment, everything seemed lost, but no one expected what happened next. A single group of knights managed to climb a ladder left unattended by the defenders. They reached the top of the wall against all odds. The first man to the top was said to be Godfrey of Bouillon, though accounts differ. Still, his presence on the ramparts became a powerful symbol. Crusaders surged forward. Defenders scrambled in panic. And like a spark leaping from one dry branch to another, the line broke. Jerusalem was breached. But the climax of the crusade came wrapped in darkness. Once inside the city, chaos erupted, far beyond what many leaders intended. Streets became rivers of violence. Buildings burned. Voices pleaded, cried, prayed. Some crusaders looked upon the destruction with horror, while others believed they were fulfilling divine judgment. The truth, as always, was much more complicated and far more tragic. In the midst of it all, a mysterious silence fell over certain parts of the city. Some witnesses claimed they heard chanting coming from churches untouched by the flames. Others swore the air shimmered with an unexplainable stillness, as if the city itself mourned. Were these exaggerations, misremembered stories, or something else entirely? History leaves the question hauntingly open. What happened in Jerusalem that day still sparks fierce debate. Were the Crusaders heroes fulfilling a sacred vow? Or were they conquerors driven by fear, exhaustion, and rage? No single answer satisfies everyone. But something undeniable happened in those streets. The world changed. And yet, this is where the story takes its darkest turn. Because just when the Crusaders believed they had achieved the ultimate victory, a new and even more complicated struggle began, one involving rival kingdoms, shifting alliances, and a Muslim leader who would rise with a brilliance no one foresaw. His name would become legendary. But for now, his story lies just beyond the horizon. The capture of Jerusalem sent shockwaves across continents. For the Crusaders, it felt like the fulfillment of a divine promise, a moment they believed would echo through eternity. Yet beneath the celebrations and tears of victory, a heavy truth lingered. They had taken the holy city, but could they hold it? Almost immediately, the new Crusader states sprang up like fragile seedlings in a hostile desert. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli formed the foundation of a new order in the Middle East. But these territories were isolated, thinly populated, and surrounded by powerful Muslim dynasties. Each castle required soldiers. Each border required vigilance. And every leader knew the uneasy reality. Their victory had created a new war front, not peace. The Muslim world, fractured for years, began to stir with renewed purpose. Leaders who had once fought each other now shared a common cause. Scholars, poets, and warriors wrote passionately about the loss of Jerusalem. Their words sparked something the Crusaders had not anticipated: a growing unity across regions that rarely agreed on anything. Slowly, steadily, a counterforce gathered momentum. This shift did not happen overnight. The decades following the First Crusade were filled with uneasy truces, shattered alliances, and surprising friendships. Some Crusader lords negotiated with Muslim rulers as equals. Others betrayed their allies in pursuit of personal gain. The idealistic vision of a unified Christian kingdom in the East slowly eroded under the weight of reality. Politics, not piety, now shaped decisions. The turning point came with the rise of a figure who would become one of history's most admired leaders. Salah ad-Din, known in the West as Saladin. Charismatic, disciplined, and fiercely devoted, he set out to unite the Muslim lands under one banner. Many underestimated him at first, but his patience, strategy, and sense of justice transformed the balance of power. The Crusader states, once bold and aggressive, now felt the pressure closing in around them. Yet, even as the Crusaders struggled to maintain control, their presence brought unexpected consequences. Trade expanded. Knowledge flowed across cultures. Medicine, mathematics, architecture, and philosophy traveled between worlds that had long remained separate. The clash of civilizations produced destruction, yes, but also connection. It planted seeds that would influence Europe's growth for centuries. Still, the shadow of the First Crusade remained long and complicated. For Christians, it became a tale of divine triumph and impossible endurance. For Muslims, it became a memory of loss, survival, and eventual renewal. For Jews living in both Europe and the Middle East, it was often a time of terror and uncertainty, their communities caught between clashing powers. No matter the perspective, the consequences were enormous. Borders shifted, kings rose and fell. Entire cities changed forever. And the crusade, meant to restore peace and unity, had instead created generations of conflict and tension. But here's the part that makes the story even more gripping. Despite all the bloodshed, despite all the victories and defeats, the First Crusade did not settle anything. It was only the opening chapter of a much larger, more tangled saga, one that would see Saladin reclaim Jerusalem, European kings launch new crusades, and alliances form across faiths in ways no one could have predicted. The world after the First Crusade was not calmer. It was more volatile, more connected, more unpredictable. And the legacy it left behind still shapes our world today. The story of the Crusades is not just a tale of armies and empires. It is a mirror reflecting the hopes, fears, and ambitions that have driven humanity for centuries. When we look back at the dusty roads to Jerusalem, at the shattered walls of Antioch, and at the divided kingdoms that rose and fell, we are forced to confront a difficult truth. Faith can inspire extraordinary courage, but it can also unleash unimaginable destruction. As the Crusaders marched, many believed they were changing the world for the better. Yet the world they shaped became far more complicated than any of them dreamed. Their victories carried consequences they could not foresee. Their sacrifices opened doors they never intended. And their failures created new struggles that stretched long beyond their own lifetimes. It's a reminder that history is never simple, and even the most righteous intentions can spiral into something far darker. But amid the clash of swords and the cries of battle, there are quieter stories, too, moments of compassion, unlikely alliances, and shared humanity. Knights who spared enemy families, Muslim commanders who honored their defeated foes, traders and scholars who exchanged knowledge across cultural borders. These moments remind us that even in the harshest conflicts, people can choose understanding over hatred and cooperation over chaos. So what does the legacy of the Crusades mean for us today? It tells us that powerful ideas, faith, honor, fear, hope, shape the world as much as armies do. It warns us that division can ignite like dry grass. And it asks us to look carefully at the choices we make when we believe we are acting for a greater cause. Are we healing the world or tearing it apart? Are we listening to each other or building new walls? Perhaps the most haunting question is this: if the Crusaders had known what their actions would unleash, would they have marched at all? Or would they have paused, if only for a moment, to imagine a different path? As we close this chapter of history, remember these stories are not just about the past. They shape our present. They warn us about the future. And they remind us that even the greatest conflicts begin with small choices that echo across generations. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to subscribe to History Hub for more cinematic stories.